Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Rumble. Usually, I do the live streamings at 11 a.m. Eastern American time, 5 p.m. in Central European time. But for special guests like Kim, we wanted to shift this live streaming because I was keen on having a conversation with her about what's going on nowadays in the United States, especially in the era that precedes now the elections. And there are so many, I would say, complicated events that happened in the past week. Kim, thank you so much for coming to the show and dedicating your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a wild time here in the United States with
Yes,
these elections. So
it is.
all eyes are on our election process, and it's just, I mean, what a wild trip we're on, right?
And actually, we are also concerned about what's happening in the United States, although we're not Americans, but we're watching carefully because what happens in the US impacts every one of us around the world, especially in regards of the foreign policy of the US.
Isn't that too bad? I think about that. I think about it's too bad on a couple of levels. First of all, it's too bad that the United States has so much power and control around the world when it comes to foreign policy. But it's also too bad that because we do have all of that power around the world and it is disrupting lives, in particular people around the world, that they can't even vote on this.
Yes.
Only Americans can vote on this, and everyone else is just kind of left to whatever we decide. And I think that's unfortunate. Not that I'm advocating for,
Universal right for voting.
Yeah, but I do think about that. I think about how that's a really unfortunate situation.
Now we're giving new ideas to the World Economic Forum.
Right, yeah. One world government.
Here.
We're not calling for that.
Yeah. Kim, this past week, Donald Trump received two remarkable endorsements. First from RFK Jr. and second from Tulsi Gabbard, both former Democrats. I followed the development in the US and how Tulsi Gabbard and RFK started to shift a little bit, let's say, to the center from the Democratic Party. And they have their own reasons, and I truly believe that their reasons are genuine to leave the Democratic Party. But to what extent these endorsements improve, first of all, Trump's chances in swing states in the US?
I think that these have really definitely improved his chances, in particular with RFK Jr. That is, a lot of people really were following RFK Jr. They really liked RFK Jr. They voted Democrat in the past, or they've voted Libertarian or third party. And when he decided to go all in for Donald Trump, and he's recently said he's going to help the guy get elected, he wants to be part of that administration. I'm seeing a lot of people say, well, I never would have considered voting for Donald Trump before, but if RFK Jr.
Yes.
says this is a good thing to do, then I guess that's what I'm going to do. And I think then seeing him right on the heels of RFK Jr. bring Tulsi Gabbard in, who was a Democrat, she was part of the DNC, and she left the DNC when they basically threw Bernie Sanders under the bus. When they see somebody like Tulsi Gabbard following quickly on the heels of RFK Jr., they're starting to see, people are feeling even more comfortable with voting for Donald Trump. People that have never voted for Trump before, they're thinking, here is maybe a unity government of some kind. This is a government that isn't alienating people that are coming from the other side of the aisle, but instead embracing those people, not demonizing them or saying, we don't want you. And that's kind of how Democrats act, right? They're like, we don't want that kind here.
Mm-hmm.
But they're instead embracing and saying, we're going to create a unity government. And I think a lot of people that have been disillusioned with Donald Trump, people that voted for him, but they wanted to see an anti-establishment government. They didn't get that in the first administration. They're seeing RFK Jr., who talks incessantly against the deep state, against the CIA. He's against all of the establishment stuff. They see that. They see him being brought in and being part of the Trump transition team that's going to be selecting the next government. And people that were disillusioned with Trump now, who voted for him, are now saying, okay, I'll give him another chance. So I think, and those are people that probably would have voted Libertarian and or just would have sat out of the election. So I think this has definitely boosted his chances of being reelected. And look, I don't agree with him or RFK Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard when it comes to Israel-Palestine. That is but I think many of us are used to that. We're used to, unfortunately, American politicians just siding with Israel blindly, and Palestinians getting the brunt of they just get the short end of the stick every single time. So, that's kind of unfortunately par for the course. Everything else, however, with this new, I would have, I'm in the same camp. I've never voted for Trump. I considered it this time around. Israel Palestine definitely has persuaded me against voting for him, and even for RFK when he was running for president. But I will say, him bringing RFK Jr. in and Tulsi Gabbard in has made me think again about that, wondering if, well, at least they'll burn down some of the establishment, and this is a sign that maybe they really will.
Actually, I'm an objective observer here. I don't want either Trump or let's say Kamala Harris to become president, but who am I to choose? I'm not an American. But in any ways, when I see the campaign of Trump, it's more attractive to the American people when it comes to, for example, including someone like RFK in his team, and he's coming from a Democrat. This gives an impression that he is tolerant towards a former let's say, opponent of him to come and join his team. Secondly, we have Tulsi Gabbard. She has her reputation, of course, as a former Marine or an officer in the army. So he's combining different forces in the American society in his campaign. I totally understand that. But particularly on this campaign of Trump, I don't expect from Trump to be neutral when it comes to Israel. His popular base is quite clearly also coming from the Christian Zionists. Also, he
Right.
needs the endorsement of AIPAC. But when it comes to RFK, and his story is clear with the CIA, and he has great position on COVID, for example, and in the war in Ukraine. But when
Right.
it comes to Palestine and Israel, I feel that he is not being genuine when he speaks about the Palestinian case, as if something switches in his brain and he all of a sudden becomes a neocon hawk only when he speaks about Palestine and Israel.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's a really inconsistent position for him to be so against the establishment, for him to be so anti or pro peace, anti war, and yet support Israel blindly when Israel has been one of the main reasons why we've destabilized the Middle East and why we've remained in endless wars. How can you be a person against endless wars and yet support Israel to that level to where, where you, I mean, it's one thing to support Israel and say, look, I want them to be a stable, secure country, but I'm not willing to go and do all of their bidding and all the things that they want to do in order, in their minds, to remain stable, because their idea of remaining stable is destabilizing everyone around them so that they can expand and control. So it's one thing to kind of take that more nuanced position on Israel, but he's not taken that. Tulsi Gabbard also hasn't. She is somebody who in the past, I'm even more suspicious
Yes.
with her because she's actually in the past tweeted out things in support of Palestinians. And then suddenly, when she kind of went more towards the right wing and being more ingratiated with Republicans, she suddenly is now out there at the pro-Israel marches. She's saying, she's talking about radical Islam and how that's and that's not what's going on with the Palestinians. That's not the plight there. Yes, there are some groups like ISIS or whatever. This is not Hamas, and the Palestinians is nothing like that. So she's kind of gone really hard on the rhetoric, and it really doesn't make there is something. I mean, look, how can we not be suspicious? As much as I don't want to think that my politicians or even people that I adore and have loved, it just real, like RFK Jr., I've just adored the guy. I still do in a lot of aspects, in a lot of ways. But it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow to be like, well, what has happened? Who got to you? How did they get to you? What is going on here? And it's hard not to become extremely suspicious that somehow, something, some way, they've been compromised. I don't know if that's through blackmail of them or blackmail of a loved one, or if it's just they're being set aside by the CIA saying, you want what happened to your uncle and your dad to happen to you, then this is what you need to do. Or if it's the money for the campaigns, or, I don't know what it is that motivates them, but it certainly doesn't feel genuine.
No,
it feels
not at all.
contrived.
Yes, like you remember Elon Musk before he went to Israel,
Right.
And he was on a podcast and he spoke about what's happening in Gaza, and he gave a really balanced talk about what's happening there
Yep.
and how killing children will produce more Hamas fighters, for example. And this is when you talk to the American audience, Americans would understand when you say such things. And then he goes to Israel and comes back, and all of a sudden he is running a campaign in favor of Israel. He is invited by Netanyahu to attend his speech in Congress. And this is all coming at times when Israel is accused of committing genocide, and there is a plausible case against Israel in the ICJ and the ICC.
Right.
Therefore, it's not like before October 7 when you have a pro-Israel position because it's the right thing to do in the US if you want to get elected. But after this, it's also with the shift of the opinions in the US, especially among the younger generation, I think this is also going to harm them on the long run to be let's say, Israel supporter, because believe me, in a decade or even less, the ICJ will rule out that Israel committed genocide, and then these politicians could be considered complicit in committing genocide. So long term, it's a very bad business for them to put all their eggs in the Israeli basket.
In particular for Tulsi Gabbard, because she's young and she's got a long political career ahead of her. I think for RFK Jr., he even said it in his last speech. He's got 10 years left. Maybe that this won't be an issue for him for the next 10 years. But for Tulsi Gabbard, this could very well come back to bite her in the ass, like later on in the future, if she's trying to run for president in the future, or if she wants position. People will look back at this, just like we did with the Iraq war, for example. And now we don't want anybody in government who was in support of the Iraq war. That's a stain on your record. You have to go back and apologize and explain yourself for being duped and buying all of the nonsense. And I think that is a very likely position in the future, that Tulsi, being somebody young, is going to have to explain away. Donald Trump, it won't matter to him. RFK Jr., it probably won't matter for him as much either. But the younger generation, I think this is going to be one of those look back but they're gambling. They're gambling the other direction, right?
Yeah, this is a gambling, actually. When I see the next elections in the US, this is just my suspicions. I think that Trump will win this election with the team that he has. How do you see the foreign policy of a potential Trump admin in particularly two cases here? We have Ukraine, and then we have the potential regional war between Iran and Israel in this case.
Yeah, I think that the Trump administration doesn't want war. I think that even being as pro-Israel as RFK Jr., Tulsi, and Trump are, and a lot of the other people in the Trump camp, I don't think they actually want war with Iran. I do think that they will draw the line there. They might antagonize, ruffle feathers, they might do things, but I do think that they will stop short at war with Iran. I think they'll stop short at bringing any U.S. troops into the Middle East in any further conflicts, even if Israel tries to provoke and goes further in. I just don't see them easily going into that. When it comes to Ukraine and Russia, Donald Trump's administration would absolutely push for a peace agreement. That will happen. So that is something that I think Americans, including myself, as much as we're disgusted by what's happening in Palestine and what the Israelis have been doing for decades to the Palestinian people, I think that the question a lot of Americans have to ask ourselves is, would we rather have war with Iran? Let's just say, if we have to choose, if the Trump administration would absolutely go to war with Iran, for sure the Kamala Harris administration will go to war with Russia. She is controlled by the Hillary Clinton camp. She is a puppet of Hillary Clinton. I can't stress this enough. I've been saying this over and over. And since she was running for president, when she ran in 2020, I was saying to people, this is a Hillary Clinton puppet. That's who this is. She got propped up by the Hillary Clinton machine. They all surrounded her. Hillary Clinton surrounded her. All of Hillary Clinton's policy advisors, all of her funders, everybody who propped up Hillary Clinton shifted and propped up Kamala Harris. When Kamala Harris opened up her mouth, suddenly people were like, wait a minute, I don't know about this person. So I'm not sure if I should support this person because she doesn't really do anything. She just giggles. So she lost a lot of support. The Hillary Clinton machine then pivoted. They tried this little pivot. They were like, oh no, our girl fell. What do we do? And they tried to pivot, and they put all of the resources towards Pete Buttigieg. That's who they put the resources. And those of us that were paying attention to that election in 2019, 2020, on the back end of where the money was coming from, follow the money. That is where the money was. So the money then shifted to Pete Buttigieg. And if you remember, Pete Buttigieg went up, Kamala Harris dropped out before any primaries. Pete Buttigieg went to the Iowa caucus and declared himself, suddenly he was declared winner of the Iowa caucus, very similar to what happened in Arizona with Trump and Biden, a very similar scenario. It was almost like a test run. And he declared himself a winner. And in reality, Bernie Sanders actually won that caucus. But that gave Pete Buttigieg this momentum. But then Pete Buttigieg faltered. And when he faltered, and then all of it shifted to Biden, and it was a very reluctant shift to Biden. Hillary Clinton's camp is not, Biden is not a Hillary Clinton puppet the way Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg would have been. So he wasn't exactly the first pick, but they kind of went with it. And I was saying back then, look, Kamala Harris is going to be the VP pick. Trust me, guys. She's the VP pick because that's the anointed one that they selected to be the new Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton's controlling her from behind the scenes. And sure enough, Kamala Harris got selected as the VP. And funny enough, the only other Democrat candidate to be selected to be placed in the cabinet was Pete Buttigieg, the other guy that they put their resources towards. So this has been playing out for a while. Now, I knew when they put Kamala as the VP and Biden as president, I knew that I believe they would do it at the 3-year mark. I thought that they would move Biden out and put Kamala in. That Kamala was the one they wanted for president. But then, the presidency started and Kamala, I think in their mind, they thought, we'll put Kamala in front of the people and people will start liking her. They'll start seeing her in this presidential role, but nobody did. Nobody liked her. She got in there and her ratings worsened like, how is this even possible? And she's even worse than Joe Biden. So I thought they would abandon, because in my mind, I still had this false idea that Democrats cared somewhat about what voters thought, but I was giving them a little bit of benefit. But it turns out they don't care what voters think at all. And they went forward with this plan, which I thought there's no way they're going to go forward with this and really put Kamala Harris in there. Nobody likes her. But okay, now here we are, and they have. But this is all by design. This has been done for a long time. And so mark my words, and this is why Kamala Harris doesn't sit for interviews. She's trying to back out of the debate with Donald Trump. She doesn't have any policy positions. It's because she is a puppet of Hillary Clinton. So whatever Hillary Clinton's foreign policy was, is going to be the policy of Kamala Harris. And what does Hillary Clinton want more than anything? To oust Putin. I don't know why. I don't know what she's got against the guy, if he rejected some romantic advance or something that happened, because she almost acts like a scorned lover. She hates Putin, and she's been hating him for a long time and blaming everything on him. So Hillary wants Putin gone. Kamala Harris will take us to war with Russia. That is so you have to choose as an American. Do you want war with Russia? Which one do you think would be worse? War with Russia? Then go with Kamala Harris. I do think she'd be better on Israel-Palestine. I think she'd still be pro-Israel, but I think it'll be a little better.
Yes.
Or do you want war in the Middle East, continued genocide, and a potential war with Iran if you go with Donald Trump? You have to take your pick. Yeah. I think it's worse to go to war with Russia.
Yeah, I mean, if we have to choose between two wars, this is really it shows the state of the affairs in Washington itself. It cannot really sustain the establishment without wars, because wars are opportunities. And these people are not only going for war for geopolitical reasons, because if it's only geopolitics, then you have to calculate the national security and strategic goals of the US. And in this case, the strategic goal of the US should be, if you are an American imperialist leader, it should be China, because China is a graver, let's say, threat to the US monopoly and dominance around the world than Russia is. But they have picked now Russia, and this war is very dangerous, in my opinion, and it opened gates for Russia to improve its relationship with China. And now the Americans have to face a coalition of nations, and not only Russia itself. And this is, of course, leading to this gradual shift in the balance of power, and we're moving from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And why I see Trump administration very dangerous for the Middle East, for this particular reason, because once we are doing this shift from a unipolar into multipolar world, the Israelis know that their presence in the region will be in jeopardy, and they will be existential threat once the US is no longer the absolute hegemon around the world, because it exists in the Middle East thanks to the American money, weapons, and before that, the British Empire. So, in my opinion, here, the Netanyahu government, they will try to drag in the US into conflict to reshuffle this status quo in the region and bring in the US as an hegemon over the region to protect Israel itself against the threats coming against the Israeli side. So I truly see that RFK, Trump, and Tulsi together, if they don't drain the swamp seriously in the US, there is going to be major escalation in the Middle East because the ground is already fertile. And you can see this propaganda that Iran is hacking the documents in the US, and then they were hacking the campaign of Trump, or they tried to assassinate him. So they're paving the people's public opinion in this case, in my opinion. I hope that I am wrong on this case. But if I want to ask you about something, and this is very, very interesting, because since October 7, although the US mainstream media keeps portraying the pro-Palestine Americans as if the Antifas and only the Black Lives Matter people, very radical left. But at the same time, I see so many influential conservatives on X, they are criticizing Israel day and night. And this is, for them, has become a niche. Since October 7, they've been talking about it like every single day. And despite that, they don't see a problem with Trump. They, they see that Trump could be a candidate who will stop the wars. Yes, probably he has an intention, but also he has an interest. Therefore, I don't really understand this controversy between people going too far in supporting Trump and at the same time too far in, let's say, criticizing Israel.
Well, it's because it's so new. The ability to criticize Israel is new, and it's still in its infancy because we've never been able to really openly do it here. It's always been, in our media, what we're taught in schools, what everybody is told is Israel's the good guys. Israel's they're just a bunch of Jews that have run from the Holocaust, the terrible atrocities that have happened to them. They're just trying to survive, and now another group is trying to Holocaust them, right? That is the narrative here. So I think for a lot of people, this is the reason why they're so confused and why they still hold on to candidates or values that seem to be antithetical to now their criticisms of Israel is because it's so new. So I think it will develop. I think that now that the criticisms, that the Pandora's box has been opened to allow for the criticism of Israel, and I think that that is going to increase. And I think that we will see a shift. It won't be this election cycle, but I do think the next election cycle, and certainly the one after that, there will be a major shift on Israel. And that is why I'm saying, with Tulsi Gabbard, for example, this is a political gamble. It's a really bad political position to take, because the writing's on the wall that where the populace is going with their viewpoints on Israel. And it won't be, if you're pro-Israel right now, that will not be the majority position come 8 years from now, in 2 election cycles from now. So I think that, I can't, I'm really critical of the hypocrisy that people have when it comes to Israel. Like, how can they support Israel? And yet they've got all of these, or they hate Israel, or they support Israel, but then they have all these opposing hypocritical viewpoints, right?
Yes.
But I just think it's because it's in its infancy. It's still new. It's still green for people. They're still navigating it. And I think as people wake up more and more, they're going to say, wait a minute, and they are, where people are starting to say it out loud. Israel has a disproportionate amount of influence over our political system. They openly brag. AIPAC openly brags about getting candidates elected because they're pro-foreign Middle Eastern country, right? I mean, that's saying, like, we can oust your politicians. We'll get rid of them, and we'll put in our own supportive people. And people are waking up to that, and they're questioning that. Really powerful voices are questioning that. And I think that is, it just takes time to wake people up and to bring them out of that viewpoint. And I think if the base demanded of Donald Trump, for example, to not be pro-Israel, he wouldn't be. I mean, he's more about being popular than anything. That's the one thing he cares about more than anything. And that's not a bad thing for a politician to be. In fact, that's the best thing for a politician to be. People blame Donald Trump for caring about popularity and people liking him. And I'm thinking, isn't that what your job is? I mean, your job as a politician is, people are supposed to like your position, support your position. You don't go against the people. You're supposed to do what they want. And Donald Trump is very sensitive to that. So I think if his base, and things change fast. I could say 8 years. It could be in a year. It could be in two, where the whole base changes and says we're not for Israel anymore. And I think
Yes.
something happens and nobody's for Israel anymore. I don't think Donald Trump will be either. I think he's malleable. I think he's malleable. I don't think he cares. He'll just do what people like. So
Yes.
when the base changes, I think Donald Trump will change.
Do you also see that this shift that you were speaking, you explained the how the Pandora box has been open now for the discussion and critique for Israel? Do you see that this shift could also reach to the Christian evangelicals, because the amount of support among them is crazy, and they remind me, because I leave sometimes comments under these posts, and I'm myself Christian from Syria, and they say you're not the true Christian, and if you don't love Israel, then you're not a Christian. Do you see
Yeah,
that
well,
there is an
yeah.
opportunity with them to open up and to become more open-minded vis-a-vis the Israeli case? Because Israel, as far as I'm concerned, they are persecuting the Christians in
Right.
Palestine.
Well, more people are becoming Catholic. I mean, well, at least the big, powerful voices, we're seeing a lot of people
Mm.
moving towards Catholicism, which is not a Zionist form of Christianity. I mean, Catholics are Christians, but they're not Zionists. They don't have the same end of times prophecies. They don't believe in the exact literal gathering of Israel the way that the evangelicals do. So I think that we're seeing a couple of shifts happen. One, fewer young people are religious. So I think the evangelical hold will just fade with time because fewer people are evangelical. The young people that are turning toward religion, I'm seeing a big shift towards Catholicism
Mm.
for whatever reason. I mean, I grew up Catholic. My family's Catholic. Uh, I mean, okay, all four. More power to them. I guess I don't understand it personally, but I do understand because it was the first of the Christian churches, essentially.
Yeah.
So people want that. They want the first one rather, but kind of ignoring the whole history of the Catholic Church and the power that the popes have held over societies and people, and
Yes.
abuses of powers and whatnot, and warmongering that's gone on. All of that aside, so I do think that the evangelicals are losing their grip and they're becoming a smaller and smaller base. So I don't
Mm.
think they'll be as power. I don't think they're going to shift because that's a religious viewpoint, but I don't think that they're going to wield as much power as people shift towards Catholicism or away from religion entirely.
I hope that they change on this case, especially with the belief that all the Jewish people should go to Palestine, and then the Armageddon has to happen. And I don't know how many million people should die there for the
Right.
second coming of Messiah. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we're living in crazy world. Kim, last question in
Sure.
short. Is a sane foreign policy possible by Washington without a regime change there? And when I say regime change, I mean the current ruling establishment. We're talking about military industrial complex, CIA, the bankers, the Wall Street, and you know.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this and I've very, very recently, and I haven't fleshed out this idea completely. So I've been thinking a lot about this. How do we get rid of this influence in our government? And I'm leaning towards we have to get rid of the government. I don't want it to sound like I'm saying overthrow the government, some sort of revolution. I'm not saying that. I think we should get rid of Congress and the like, not maybe get rid of them, but severely reduce the power of Congress and the executive branch and bring that power back to the states, and with the states back to the people. So I do believe in the republic. So I'm not saying I want a direct democracy where everybody votes on every single issue, but I would say that everybody votes on the vast majority of the issues within the states, and then the states cast the vote on the federal level so that we maintain the federal republic with the power with the states, but which I do believe in, but then also bringing the power back to the people. I just think that we've got to unravel the power of Congress, and we have to unravel the power of all of these lobbies and the big money interests. And I think, again, I haven't fleshed out this idea entirely, but the only way I think we can do this now is severely limiting the power of the government and saying, you guys just cannot vote anymore on wars. You're not allowed to vote on anymore on funding or giving weapons. We do that as the people. We decide which wars we go to. We decide which countries we fund, we deliver weapons to. We decide, with the banking, we decide everything. And you people have lost your right. You have lost our consent to govern us. And that is the thing, is we as the American people have to remember, we've given this political institution, these institutions, we've consented to allow them to govern us. And that is by our consent. And we could take that consent away. And I think that is what we, the people, need to do, is take the consent away and say, we no longer consent to you governing us. You guys have lost the privilege and the ability through all of these poor decision makings, taking all of the money from all of the big corporations, and we, the people, want the power back. And I think that somehow we have to get to that.
I think most people do not know how much power they have in their hands, and the power of no, and rejecting to give consent, as you mentioned. Many people during COVID were the same. What can I do about it? Collectively, we can do a lot. And that's why we host guests like Kim Iversen on this show, to shed light on the strengths and the weaknesses of the politicians and the people themselves, so that people can also understand their rights and how can they deal with such situations, because we want for the United States to be collaborative and cooperative with the rest of the world. We want to have good relationship with the United States, to benefit from the advancement in the US, technological, industrial, etc. And at the same time, we don't want to be bullied by the US. That's all that we are asking. Yeah, that's not much, in my opinion. Kim, thank you so much for coming to the show. I really appreciate that you dedicated your time and wisdom and to share it with the audience and with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
The pleasure is mine. And thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all. We will see you again tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you and upon your families, and peace be upon you, Kim. Salam.